The World Jewish Congress has played always a very important role in the issue of restitution. Ambassador Lauder is our president, the president of WJRO, and Michael played a very important role during the years in WJRO. One word of background. WJRO was established in 1993, a few years after the collapse of the Soviet bloc, and the idea was that it wouldn't be healthy that the government will lead the campaign for restitution. So WJRO came into being, representing most of the Jewish organization on that specific issue of restitution. And the government, mainly the government of Israel and government of the United States, gave political support behind the scenes. When we speak about political support, which is also important today, that means that the leaders of the United States, the President, Secretary of State, and Israel, the Prime Minister, the President, Foreign Minister, in their meetings with leaders from Central Europe will raise this issue because when it is not done, it is interpreted by the other side that the issue is not important for the governments of the United States and the government of Israel. After a year in this job, I can say with great confidence that our chances of success depends very much on the unity of action. And when there are cases that different organizations work in a parallel way, it is only interpreted by the other side, by the other countries, as a point of weakness, and we should do whatever we can, and I know that Michael is working very hard on that, to achieve the unity of action between the organizations, the governments, and the Jewish communities in the different countries, when our target are the governments and the parliaments. We always make the distinction between communal and private property, and when we talk about private property, about property with heirs and heirless property, which is the majority of the private property. Our aim in communal property is to get legislation, and when the legislation is adopted, to create funds or foundations for us and the Jewish community, sometimes with the government, for the implementation. Because what can happen is there is a legislation, for instance, in Poland since 1998, but its implementation has been very, very slow, and until today, I think only about 29% of the cases were decided, not all of them positive. Those foundations that we have in 3 countries up till now, in Poland, in Romania, and in Hungary, are responsible for making the claims after the legislation is being passed, and when the claims is approved, to decide to manage the property and to decide what to do with the property. What parts to renovate and what parts to give or to sell. The renovation is extremely expensive, and the one big renovation, for instance, in Poland that we have today, this is the synagogue in Zamość. The budget of the renovation, most of it will come from the European Union, will be between 2 and 3 million euro. Another issue which is very much relevant to the issue of communal property is that in some of the countries in the early 90s, there were legislation to give back religious property. And what we are trying to do is to get new legislation which will extend the criteria of the communal property, what we, for instance, are trying to do now in Latvia and in other countries. In some of the countries, the property is giving back in rem, but in other places, compensation is offered. And whenever compensation is offered, we have always the dilemma, because the compensation which is offered doesn't come to the real worth of the property. We have now a case in Lithuania, and there is a meeting of the Lithuanian government tomorrow, where for the community of 255,000 Jews before the war, very rich community with very rich assets, the offer is for about $30-something million, which will be paid in 10 years. And the dilemma has been always whether to oppose it, and then you have the risks that the offer will never come again, or to accept it because the money is very much needed by the communities. In most cases, the community is pressed to accept the deals. In the case of Lithuania, we have accepted a very creative definition, which is not to accept it, not to endorse it, but on the other hand, not to oppose it publicly. And we are waiting to the results of the decision, and even if the government passes it, there is no proof that the parliament, where there have been some anti-Semitic expressions, will also pass it. When we speak about private property, again, in most of the cases, it's not in rem, but compensation, where we put emphasis not only on the question of the compensation or the percentages of the worth of the asset, but also about the procedure. Because it could happen that you have quite a good legislation, but it will be so difficult to claim it because you will need to present all sorts of documents. Many of them were destroyed during the Holocaust time, that this will neutralize the legislation. So we try to emphasize both things. First of all, if possible, to get it in rem, if not, to get a reasonable compensation, but also to put a lot of emphasis on friendly atmosphere, on friendly procedure. The major case of private property, property generally, is of course Poland, because Poland had the greatest Jewish community before the war. Until now, there is no legislation on private property. The Prime Minister Tusk of Poland promised, including to Ambassador Lauder when he visited him in Poland, to have a legislation, but since then, 2 or 3 years, nothing has happened. This is one of our major challenges, how to get a real dialogue with Poland. There is, of course, the issue of heirless property, which is the toughest to handle, because most of the countries, and again Poland has a leading position on that, is that when there is heirless property, it goes back to the government. What we say that this is very true in normal situation, when there is a couple who lives in a village and they don't have children, and their property goes back to the government. But since the nature of the Holocaust, with complete towns and villages and families were wiped out, another creative solution should be found, and our idea is that a fund should be created which will serve three purposes. One, welfare for the survivors. Second, education in these specific countries, Holocaust education. And thirdly, commemoration. This issue of the heirless property got to the awareness of the international community in the Prague conference, which took place last June, initiated by the Czech Republic as the president of the European Union. And this has been a very important development, very important conference. 49 countries participated. And it brought the issue to the awareness of the international community. And for the first time in the document concluding the Prague conference, the Terezin document, there are three different references to heirless property. The Prague conference also decided to establish the Terezin Institute, and which has started now working. And one of the importances of the Terezin Institute is that in the Prague conference and in the Terezin Institute, for the first time, the European Union is involved, and a memorandum of understanding was signed between the Czech government and the European Union on that. Another important element in the Prague conference in Terezin Institute is that for the first time, WJC role was recognized by the international community. And in the document that is now being drafted, which is called Best Practices and Guidelines for all the countries of Europe, speaks very specifically about the role of WJC. We are now in a process to try and check here in the European Union and with France and Brussels what are the possibilities of some influence, if not legal but moral, of the European Union institutions in the issue of restitution. It's very clear that the European Union has a role to play about countries who didn't join yet the European Union. Countries like Croatia, Serbia, Macedonia, Bosnia. And in our discussions with the EU and the representatives in these countries, they said very clearly that they told the governments that the road to Brussels goes through restitution legislation, not only for Jews, general restitution legislation. We would like also to see if there is a possibility that in specific issues the European Union will go towards the countries that we are talking about, especially Poland, and issues which are important to Poland, to encourage Poland to be more forthcoming in the issue of restitution. And I'm very glad to be here and discuss this issue with in the EU, with ambassadors here and with you here, to try to make progress on this issue, which is not easy but very challenging. Thank you.